Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. So much to bring you as we try to close out the week on a strong note here. Before we're done, another look at what happened this week in New Orleans out of the Super Bowl. A lot of the former Georgia players in the game reflecting back on their time at UGA, an awesome video package. We'll share that with you before the end of the show. And the guy who helped put all that together, Cody Chaffins, on hand in New Orleans to gather that. He'll join us on the show to kind of give a behind-the-scenes look at what he saw from the former Dogs in the side of the game ahead of the game. By the way, a little chatter about maybe a flu outbreak with the Eagles right now. We can't confirm nor deny that, but there is news out there about that. So we'll get more of that perhaps as it is, perhaps needed in the show. Jeff Sentell also joins us here today, too. There's a lot of little stuff I kind of want to get into with Jeff. I want to give Jeff a chance to respond to the hot topic yesterday about how Georgia's NIL efforts were described. There's also a recent staff hire that Georgia's made that I don't think we've paid enough attention to as of yet. I got a couple thoughts on the Super Bowl. I love a former Georgia player celebrating a really awesome moment in the history of this program. You're going to love that on the program today. And off the top, perhaps the Georgia 2025 recruiting class is even better than many of us realize. I've got visual evidence that perhaps proves that point. And maybe in the midst of everything else that's going on, we should take a little more time to appreciate exactly what Georgia did when it came to this 2025 class. Let's kick it off that way. Glad you're with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I want to give you a little, realization that I have arrived at about myself in like the last few years, whatever. When you get older, you just sort of learn things about yourself. You pay attention to things. Here's one of the things that I've learned, and this is sort of a weird thing, but I have learned it. I am not a visual learner at all. I don't read graphs very well, or like charts and things like that. And I've been thinking about this because, like the analytics community in sports, they've gotten to where they love like graphs and plot points and heat charts and all this kind of stuff. And I think one of the reasons I've sort of fallen out on the analytics world a little bit is that the language that group sort of uses these days is, hey, take a look at these plots pointed on a graph, and this will tell you what you need to know about certain things in college football. And honestly, I just am too dumb to follow it. I don't read graphs very well. I'm not a visual learner. When you've got plots pointed on a graph, I don't often know exactly, what it is I'm supposed to be taking away from the information that I'm looking at. It just sort of looks like this big, blob of stuff for me. I'm not a visual learner very well. However, there was something that I saw yesterday, much simpler in terms of just the visual presentation, that gave me a brand new appreciation for Georgia's 2025 recruiting class. Just happened to be scrolling online, happened to see this. And if you're watching on video, we're going to slap this up on the screen for you. And if you are listening, we will describe it, perhaps proof that Georgia's 2025 recruiting class is maybe way better than any of us realize. Let me show this on the screen if you're watching video, and if not, I will describe it. There's an account called CFB Tracker that put this out there using data from 24/7 Sports and the composite ranking, which is probably still our favorite measuring stick for how good a recruit is for those of you that care about recruiting rankings. And so what CFB Tracker put out is schools that sign and I don't really know this account, but I don't necessarily think you have to necessarily know it. They say schools that sign the number one recruit at each position in the 2025 class. And so what you've got listed here is quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive tackle, interior offensive line, edge rusher, defensive line, linebacker, cornerback, safety, and overall athlete, along with kicker and punter. So when you look at this, you see Michigan signing the top quarterback, obviously Bryce Underwood, a lot of fanfare about him. LSU signed the top running back. Oklahoma signed the top offensive tackle. Alabama signed the top interior offensive lineman. Ohio State had the top cornerback. Texas had both the top safety and the top athlete. However, when you also look at this, the only school that's mentioned more than one time is Georgia. So actually Texas mentioned twice, but Georgia is mentioned a total of 4 times. Georgia signed the top tight end of the country, according to the 24/7 Sport Composite player ranking. Obviously, that's Elias Williams. The top edge in the country for the 24/7 Sports Composite ranking for 2025. Obviously, that's Isaiah Gibson. Elijah Griffin, top defensive lineman in America. They signed him. And then Zayden Walker, the top linebacker, signing him too. So there is something about this visual presentation, and perhaps this just sort of shows how, I guess, sort of simple and dense I can be. But seeing this sort of laid out this way visually with these kind of, if you're watching a video, the Georgia G graphic next to 4 different positions for the class of 2025, I got to tell you, that gives for me a new appreciation for this 2025 class. Not that I wasn't appreciating it already, but when you look at what Georgia did in kind of getting those main, getting the top guy at 4 pretty important positions, I think it makes you feel pretty good about that. Now, I would say that there are some reasons why maybe we haven't given as much, I guess, attention to this kind of stuff as perhaps we would in the past. Some of this is important. Some of it's perhaps not. The way in which recruits kind of come together these days is that a lot of that culminates in December. And now in December, you've got what's essentially the new National Signing Day, although not even, it's not even, what it once was in early December this year, right there in between like the SEC championship and the college football playoff, right in the midst of all the transfer portal stuff. And that really sucks a lot of the auction out of the room. So to the point, all of a sudden now, the way in which we would have fixated on all of these recruiting decisions, these announcements when they become final, all of a sudden now we don't do any of that like we would have in December because there are so many other things that we're now talking about. We celebrate all of these individual names when they join up with Georgia, typically throughout the summer. But when it kind of becomes official, it's sort of, you make note of it and then you sort of move on because there's something else to talk about. In fact, our producer today, Cody Chaffins, and I were talking about before the show about how we don't even really have Kirby Smart, audio, video clips of even really talking about these players yet. And there may be a little bit of the position coaches doing some of that, going back to New Orleans for the media day and whatnot prior to the Sugar Bowl. But for the most part, we just haven't really paid attention to the 2025 class yet. But when you see, hey, the top player at 4 different positions, all of them key positions, I think it makes you feel a little bit better about the 2025 class. Now, here's the other part of this. And I've been honest about this. I've said this myself. Another reason why we probably pay a little less attention to recruiting in the same fashion we once did is because I think the question around recruiting has sort of changed. It used to be, how many 4 stars did you sign? How many 5 stars did you sign? What are the individual measurements? What's the potential like? What could the future be with all of these players? That's sort of what it all kind of used to be. I think it's now a little bit different than that, where perhaps now there's only really one question that really matters more so than anything else. And that one question is, can this player help me right now? That's sort of become the dominant question. And so from that standpoint, the overall process of recruiting, whether it be at Georgia or somewhere else, is probably a little less, I guess, meaningful than it used to be, because obviously if you're already a talent-rich program, the sheer number of recruits that could help you immediately is just going to be a lot less for you because you presumably have a lot of talent at other positions. So there's perhaps a lot of reasons why maybe recruiting doesn't get the attention it used to get. But when you do take time to appreciate what Georgia has brought in, most of those guys now on campus going through winter workouts, getting ready for spring practice, I do think it gives you some reason to sort of feel good about all this process and perhaps maybe a fresh new appreciation for just how elite Georgia's 2025 class is. Now, all of that said, let me slightly shift gears to this and kind of go back to something we talked about yesterday. When you realize that Georgia's got best linebacker, best edge, best defensive lineman, best tight end, and among the best other positions, Talon Taylor, wide receiver, on and on you want to go, when you realize that, do you really think that Georgia somehow was able to convince these players to come to UGA for less monetary compensation than they would have gotten other places? Let me show this on the screen. Remember yesterday we talked about the On3 deal, the kind of ostentatious graphic they like to use of thrifty Kirby Smart. And we said, hey, unnamed sources saying these things about Georgia, not saying it in a complimentary fashion. NIL staffers telling Pete Nakos from On3 that Georgia got some guys for a steal. Kirby really leaned into some old school stuff and getting guys to come at a discount. That's what we talked about yesterday, Pete Nako's story from On3, that somehow Kirby is thrifty, not wanting to spend money, and convincing players to arrive at UGA for less than they could get other places. And obviously, we certainly believe that Georgia's got more to sell than just money, and they are, of course, going to wisely lean into that when they approach their recruiting. But I don't think any of us, even, hardcore Georgia partisans like, you and me, I don't think any of us believe that Kirby Smart is such a good recruiter in this day and age that he can get players to come to Georgia just using like Jedi mind tricks or something like that, that in a day and age which everybody is keenly aware of their monetary value, that somehow Georgia is cutting corners and getting players to come without having to spend for it. My guess is on the presence of the, four of the top player at the position at four different positions, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. My guess is that Georgia had to spend very big dollars to make that happen. And while Georgia is probably not the biggest spender in NIL, some programs spending more, some programs perhaps, capable of spending more even. Certainly Georgia is quite competitive in that, and Georgia is willing to kind of go throw elbows in these hardcore aggressive negotiations right now as much as anybody else is. That's our overall belief on that. But let's also consider this for a minute, that if Georgia is being, the word we've heard used before, judicious, if Georgia is being judicious with its NIL spending, if Kirby, because in the same article from Pete Nakos and On3, was also described as being wise with how they go about spending their money, getting credit for making wise decisions. If that is what's going on here, perhaps there's good reason for that to be the case, that somehow maybe if you want to have the most favorable assessment of Georgia's kind of recruiting NIL picture right now, they are clearly still getting elite recruits. The graphic we showed you earlier is proof of that. But they are doing so, perhaps, maybe, without having to worry about the looming regret that might be facing other programs. I want to play a clip for you here. This is something we intended to get to yesterday. We didn't quite have time to. This is SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey on with the Paul Feinbaum show earlier this week. And what Sankey talks about is the fact that he wants to see some sort of federal intervention from Congress to kind of protect what college athletics has been. Now, listen, Congress got its own issues. We understand that. But I think a lot of us can look around and say, boy, if they don't step in and do something, then these activist judges are just going to render college athletics unrecognizable for what it's been for all of our lifetimes and, frankly, the last 150 years. Somebody's got to do something. And when you think about how aggressive some of these NIL collectives have been in throwing these outrageous dollar figures around, to listen to Greg Sankey talk about it, maybe the way in which Kirby Smart is known for doing his business and going about his business here, maybe there is some wisdom in that. I want you to listen to Greg Sankey here talking about some very problematic behavior in his eyes and in his mind about collectives here, and see if the caricature that's drawn of Kirby Smart perhaps doesn't make a little bit more sense in light of all that. Here's Greg Sankey.
We need a name, image, and likeness system that has a level of transparency where there is protection for young people. There aren't a lot of reports about promises made that weren't fulfilled, deals that were struck that were never authorized, and problems that come. Collectives are out there, but I hear about collectives that are struggling to pay bills for promises made. That is not a healthy system. The way we're functioning can't go on.
So I think that's really interesting. And it almost makes Kirby Smart sort of sound like Dave Ramsey of recruiting. In other words, like he's not out there putting all his NIL payments on a credit card and knowing that bill's going to come due. And maybe when that bill comes due, all of a sudden you don't have the money to pay it. Maybe Georgia's being a little smarter with how they're going about their business. I think that's really interesting. We have heard all kinds of stories of, and a lot of this never gets reported because people just don't necessarily want it out there, but so-and-so school promised so-and-so player a certain amount of money, and then the player gets there. The school's like, oh, I don't know. I guess we don't quite have it. And, the player in many cases sort of out of luck. You believe the wrong person, and you're not getting the money you promised. It doesn't always happen that way, but we're led to believe it's happened perhaps more than once, certainly. And, frankly, I don't think any of us who like Georgia want Georgia to go about its business that way. We don't want Georgia making promises it can't keep. We want Georgia, certainly offering lucrative payments to players because that's what it takes to be competitive, but not in such a way that you're mortgaging your future to get it done, so much so that one day, Bain Capital or one of these big private equity firms is going to have to run in here and bail you out. We don't want that to be the next version of what Georgia football is, end up on the scrap heap like Circuit City or somewhere like that. That's not what we want Georgia football to be. And perhaps Kirby Smart is working and operating in such a way that's preventing that from happening. But as the 2025 recruiting class shows, if that is some of the wisdom on display from Kirby, it is, at least thus far, not preventing Georgia from having an elite signing class. This is not make-believe, so we'll be honest and say Georgia's not getting every player that it wants. And is it getting the most impactful, game-changing recruits? Well, I guess time will tell on that. But it's still playing the game plenty well. And maybe it's doing so without having to worry about not being able to keep promises and one day having to mortgage its future just to stay afloat. And if that is indeed the case, then perhaps that's a very good thing. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are happy that you're with us. However you get to us, video 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 963. Our podcast, wherever you find them. Just so thankful to all of you who choose to be a part of our show on a Friday like this, rolling into a fun weekend, wishing the Dawgs well against Mississippi State in basketball tomorrow. Obviously looking ahead to the Super Bowl. We're going to do more of that here in a moment. Just a really fun time to be a sports fan, and we're thankful for the privilege of being able to talk to you about it here on our program. We're thankful to our friends at Kroger here, too, who make it all possible. Getting ready for the big game. They've obviously got you covered on that. Perhaps for you, though, it's something else you're thinking about this month. More so than just that big football game, you're thinking about Valentine's Day. And you don't want to get this wrong, whether it be for the special someone in your life, your kids who are obviously all over this, whatever else. If you want to enjoy the best that Valentine's has to offer, you're sort of one-stop shop to get ready for that if you're cooking a great meal, or you're getting the flowers, or maybe a gift card, or like the little Valentine's things the kids pass out. All of that there at your local Kroger. You can shop in store and take advantage of that right now. You can also go to this website. It's Kroger.com/Valentine's-Day. Kroger.com/Valentine's-Day. And you can get all your Valentine's needs right there in one spot. I love how Kroger does it for holidays. They always do it right. By the way, have you noticed now that people are doing like Valentine's lights on the outside of their house? Have you seen this? There are some people doing that, which I think is somewhat interesting. But nonetheless, Kroger.com's got you when it comes to all your Valentine's needs. And, of course, we appreciate Kroger being a part of DawgNation Daily here today. We've got Jeff Sentell coming up here in a moment. Also, before we're done, Cody Chaffins going to join us here, too. Cody was in New Orleans this week for what's called Super Bowl opening night. And some of the great stuff we've shown you on the show this week has come via Cody. And so I want to get some little behind-the-scenes stuff from him before we're done. Also a really great package that kind of puts together a lot of Georgia players, just reflecting back on some really special memories for them at Georgia. I think this is really good. We're going to do that here kind of coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse. It's presented today by Zagoria Law. And in fact, one of the clips that is going to be in the package that we're going to run from Cody a little bit later on, I kind of want to isolate and sort of give to you here right now, because there is one of the things that I love. And look, I think most of us have made peace with the fact that, listen, maybe there's a time in the past where, like, the Georgia players were like the kids from your hometown, and you sort of felt like we were sort of all in it together, and everybody sort of was, kind of living sort of the same kind of life, things like that. We now know that in many ways, the current college athlete is living a very different life than most of us will perhaps ever live. And I'm not mad at him for that, anything like that. It just sort of feels like that what once was kind of, like I said, just sort of the kid from your local high school or the next door neighbor or something like that. It's a little bit different than that in college athletics now, but it still feels really, really good when you realize that for a player involved in a really big moment, a historical moment for Georgia, when his appreciation for that role in Georgia football history seems to really match up with the same way that it hit and sort of strikes all of us. And I thought we got something really cool in that regard from Kelee Ringo this week, obviously a member of the Philadelphia Eagles getting ready to play in the Super Bowl. And Ringo, really, I mean, if you had to say, give me like the 4 or 5 best moments in Georgia football history, like the Mount Rushmore of specific moments in Georgia football history. His pick six against Bryce Young, putting the game on ice, national championship at the conclusion of the 2021 season. Y'all, if there's a Mount Rushmore of events in Georgia football history, that's it. You love the big headline there, the Clinch Six. Ringo's pick seals a victory. And by the way, one of the things that we're going to do with our package later on is I thought Cody had a really clever idea, sort of using props like that, the fun headline, the fun newspaper, props like that to be prompts for these players to talk about their time at Georgia. I thought that worked out really well. So much so that I want to isolate Kelee on this just for a moment. In a lot of ways, Keelee's interception, as exaggerated as this sounds, like it changed a lot of our lives, right? We've been cheering for Georgia football forever, and we'd sort of seen Georgia as the program that couldn't quite get over the hump. But in that moment, it's like the culmination of like 40 years or whatever of longing and yearning to be in the championship and remembering, our family members who would love to have been there for that and bonding with our current friends and family who were there for us. Like this was, from a sporting standpoint, kind of a life-changing moment for many of us. And honestly, Kelee Ringo's memory of it is exactly what you hope it would be. This is Cody with Kelee Ringo from earlier this week. I really love this. Take a look and a listen at this right now.
Man, this is such an iconic moment. We actually had a time and team meeting where Coach Sirianni had us close our eyes and talk about one of our greatest feelings when we played football. And I couldn't help but to think about this moment. So much emotions, man, so much love for just the city of Athens, with it being 41 years and not happening. Man, words couldn't explain of how proud I was of my team and Coach Mark, just the whole organization, just be able to support them, wear the G on my chest. Man, it was definitely a great feeling.
I tell you right now, I can't get enough of stuff like that. Stuff like that really works on me. I'm a sentimental person, perhaps even to a fault. But to hear Kelee Ringo there, and we'll have more of this later on today before we're done, kind of putting a bow on our Super Bowl coverage. To hear Kelee Ringo say when Nick Sirianni, the Eagles coach, was saying, hey, close your eyes, envision a moment in which you had great success or something like that, that Ringo, even now in his NFL career, is still looking back fondly on that time at Georgia, in that moment, getting that interception, the fact that it still means as much to him as it does to all of us. I really like that. I really, really like that. And I think getting a chance to hear from those guys this week has been incredibly fun. Now, before we move on, I will say a little bit about the game. I do like the Eagles to win. I don't think that's by any means a guarantee. I think that obviously Patrick Mahomes, as others have said this week, in kind of a one-game situation like this and what you think might be a close game, he is clearly, as the recent history proves, been very difficult to beat. But on balance, I do believe that Philadelphia is the better team. I think playing as many close games as Kansas City has played is, to a degree, playing with fire, and eventually that kind of gets you burnt. So I do like Philadelphia. At one point in time, you sort of thought we might see the line, the point spread in this game kind of move through zero, and Philly might become a small favorite in their own right. That has not happened. Don't believe it will now. Kansas City is going to go into Sunday as a small favorite here. But I do like Philadelphia to win. And beyond just picking the win here, I think it's interesting to think, okay, well, maybe how that might happen. Like one of the things I get into, not everybody cares about this, is, okay, well, who's the Super Bowl MVP going to be? Who's that going to be? And on a team that's not really quarterback dominant, we don't think that Jalen Hurts is a special player. Well, now you're thinking about, like, say, Saquon Barkley, who's had an amazing year, and maybe Eagles win, he gets the award. Maybe it's that simple. It could just be that straightforward. But boy, if you look about a recipe for victory for Philadelphia, shutting down and stopping Patrick Mahomes, that's obviously got to be a big part of all that. And honestly, while Mahomes is a great quarterback, it has not been a great year offensively for Kansas City. They've scored 30 or more points just once all season. That was in the AFC Championship game. So being stifled defensively is a possibility. And getting after Mahomes, sacking him, is, of course, a way that could happen. These are both long shot picks. Don't take this to say I'm calling my shot and saying this is going to happen. But I would suggest as a possibility, just for fun, you've got Jalen Carter right now. And he's also been thought to be battling illness, so let's be careful about this. But just for fun. You got Jalen Carter right now plus 1,000 to win the Super Bowl MVP. That's essentially 100 to 1 odds. You've got Nolan Smith at plus 1,700. That's essentially 170 to 1 odds. Obviously, neither one of those things are likely to happen. The long shot odds suggest that. But could you see one of those two guys getting multiple sacks in a game like this? And if it really is kind of an easy Eagles win, a couple of touchdowns or so, because Patrick Mahomes doesn't have offensive success, because he spends time on his back, in a situation where the other quarterback, Hurts, is not likely to win the MVP, could we have kind of a long shot defensive guy win it? We have not seen a defensive player win Super Bowl MVP since Von Miller in 2016 for the Denver Broncos. But it has happened several times before, and Miller obviously got to the trophy on the steam of a successful pass rushing night. Long shot picks to be sure, and obviously wishful thinking for those of us who are Georgia fans. But I don't hate those heavy odds on either Carter or Smith. I think that could be fun. There. We'll make that around the doghouse today, presented by our friends at Zagoria Law, the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs, which means I'm guessing that our folks at Zagoria are perhaps rooting for the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday, just like many of you are. And more importantly than that, they are standing by for you right now. If you found yourself bitten by a dog, injured by a dog that wasn't yours, this is a very specific area of personal injury law. But just like any personal injury situation, if you've been harmed, if you've been wronged by someone else's negligence, well, you probably feel like you deserve proper compensation for that. And in this very specialized area of personal injury law, that's what Zagoria Law wants to work on your behalf to provide. They literally wrote the book, and I mean literally wrote a book about how to win these types of cases, so they bring a lot of expertise to you on that. So give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's dog spelled conventionally, D-O-G. 833-GA-DOG-BITE, or online, ZagoriaLaw.com, Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com. If you've been bitten by a dog, injured by a dog, if someone you love has had the same situation, happen for them, well, the next call you make needs to be to our friends at Zagoria Law, either online at ZagoriaLaw.com or 833-GA-DOG-BITE. It's great to have Zagoria Law as a part of DawgNation Daily here today. So we've actually got a lot to do before we're done today. There's big news around the SEC, all kinds of stuff. We want to cover that with you here today. I told you Cody Chaffins stops by. Another fun look at the former Dogs in the Super Bowl here. So we'll cover all of that. But for now, on everything happening with UGA recruiting, look back on 2025, a little bit of a look ahead to 2026, and some very, very interesting issues that also kind of impact Georgia's future, including a staffing hire we haven't talked enough about. Let's cover all of that and more here today with Jeff Sentell on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Jeff Sentell, and Jeff, will be totally honest, we didn't break new ground today in how we started the show, but I had seen a graphic online that I thought kind of told a story that was perhaps a little different than I've maybe given it credit for. That we had the 24/7 Sport Composite stuff. Georgia's signing the top player at 4 different positions. Texas had a couple of those. Athlete and safety, usual suspects like Michigan, LSU, Alabama are mentioned here. Oklahoma was too. Oregon as well when it comes to wide receiver. But my gosh, Jeff, when you think about an Elias Williams and an Isaiah Gibson, an Elijah Griffin, a Zayden Walker, that's still very much the sort of elite recruiting classes that Georgia's been stacking for quite some time. And when you see a graphic laid out like this, it does kind of make me think we haven't probably given enough credit for Georgia's 2025 class. Do you think this class has been overlooked just given the current landscape of the sorts of conversation that sort of sucks air out of the discussions we would have maybe one point in time had? Is the 2025 class for Georgia underrated in your mind?
True, Brandon. Good morning. I don't know if Georgia gets enough juice off of it, especially, listen, this is a me now, this is a reactionary society. I think a lot of people look at how the class landed, perhaps with Justice Terry, Ousmane Croman, kind of felt that was a belly flop a little bit. But you got to remember what it did. And Brandon, one of the things I wrote this week, and you and I both remember when we would listen to a broadcast and somebody would bring up like the DawgNation points of pride about, or the Georgia points of pride about a broadcast and how impressive that was. But get this, Brandon, you can look at every position on the Georgia defense now, every position. And the 2025 class helped build that with Isaiah Gibson right there. Every position, there's a former number 1 overall recruit at that position. Brandon, we haven't been able to say that at all during the Kirby Smart era. You got Ellis Robinson at corner, 2024, KJ Bolden at safety, 2024. You've got Justin Williams at linebacker, 2024, and Zayden Walker at linebacker, 2025. But you also add the box pieces, which I think are so vital. You have the number 1 defensive lineman in the country in Elijah Griffin, and you also had the number 1 edge in the country in Gibson, as we see him walking by right there with Uzo Duribe. If we wanted to draw the imagery really fast and furious on your show, Brandon, we could say that might be Kirby putting all 6 infinity stones in his gauntlet.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And look, the other side of this is, and I've been candid about this, part of the reason why I think some of this stuff gets less attention than it used to is the fact that the question I ask about recruits now is not, what their ranking is, but can they help right away? And at a place like Georgia, listen, it is just a fact of life that most of them won't. And that's true for Ohio State or, probably Alabama, Texas, where, in a day and age where there's so much roster turnover and the transfer portal is kind of turning into a little bit of an easy button for some programs to help fill needs, that the immediate impact player is more valuable than sort of the long-term project. And so I think some of the loss of attention on a given signing class is just based on the realization that, most of these guys are going to be stories that kind of culminate over the course of a couple of years, and college football sort of become a win now, immediate impact, or it doesn't really count type of sport. In other words, some of this is probably just unavoidable.
Yeah, you use the word valuable in there a lot, Brandon. I'm curious to see how you think here. You said like the most important question is if they can contribute right away. Well, probably contributing right away. Obviously, everybody likes to have those impact freshmen that capture national attention and end up being freshman All-Americans. But it also playing right away, Brandon, kind of keeps them portal proof. It keeps them happy. It keeps them fed with maybe a starter slab or a near starter slab, co-starter slab of reps. It was funny you said that. I was thinking, because there's a piece I'm working on right now about how tough it is these days to be considered an elite recruiter. Because if you want to be considered an elite recruiter, you got to get the high school guys. You got to keep your own guys. Retaining your own guys has become so important, but it's also bringing in the portal guys as well. And what you're able to do there, it's almost like the other thing that I think is fascinating, Brennan, when I bet a guy like you looks at a recruit, and let's say I drop a big story about Caden Prothro, or even Jared Curtis is a great example, who just said his official visits, or maybe the best example right now is Jackson Cantwell, the number 1 overall prospect in the country, and the tackle out of Nixa, Missouri. He's got Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Miami, and Michigan among his final 6. And Brennan, I'm curious, is the first thing that goes through your head, do you sit there and you go, well, there's a lot of NIL savvy programs in that mix? Remember how people used to say one of those is not like the others, when you would have perhaps a Duke or a Virginia Tech in the same Final 5 with a Georgia, an Ohio State, and an Alabama? I think that a lot of times, kind of to your point, you sit there and you go, well, that's a program that spends a lot of money, but that's also a guy that would have to get that guy on the field at the same time. It's a very interesting time, not to try and complicate the waters any further.
Well, speaking of spending money, another thing we've talked about a lot this week is the report from On3 a little earlier this week that called Kirby Smart a thrifty NIL spender and suggested that elite recruits are coming to Georgia for a discount compared to money they could get other places. Do you think that's a fair characterization of what Georgia's doing?
I think it's changed. I think that news is about 18 months, a little too fresh. Maybe that news was maybe fresh and hot, maybe like 12 to 14, 16 months ago. I do think Georgia, listen, man, I don't think Georgia's getting any red tag 5 stars. The ones that you've seen on the end of the aisle on clearance at your favorite retailer or whatever, or an open box special on the nation's #1 defensive tackle. I don't think that's happening. I think perhaps Georgia is getting a percentage discount, whereas they can sit there and they can say, they got the players that are going to make me better at Georgia to practice against every day. Georgia will have the big stage and the big spotlight. And then maybe Georgia's number is within 20, 25% of the other high bids. I think that's what's happening right now. But, Brandon, those discounts are certainly dropping. And even in this 2025 class, I think Georgia spent more to bring in high school players than they ever have before.
Last year on SEC Media Days, Kirby Smart said if NIL was a main consideration for a player, that Georgia was probably not going to get to the finish line with that player. I said on yesterday's show that if given a chance to make a similar statement this summer or at some point in time this offseason, my guess is Kirby Smart would probably say that a different way, which sort of backs up the point that you're making. Do you think that message from Kirby Smart probably has changed and Georgia, is no longer able to say, oh, listen, we're not going to be in these sort of, crazy bidding wars with it. Some people are, because my guess is that Kirby Smart would probably speak that a little bit differently than he did last summer.
I think so, Brandon. I think Georgia, let me just use a real world example here. I think there's about 5 or 6 players, maybe across 3 positions in this 2026 recruiting class that Georgia will spend to win. I think that's the best way to say that. And I think those positions are quarterback, and I think those positions are offensive tackle, perhaps linebacker as well. I think you look at what Georgia did, and I hate to say this, Brendan, but I learned how to look at this Georgia football program by kind of following the Atlanta Braves in the late 90s. When you saw, if you overspent at one position, or maybe a better term or phrase there would be, if you allocated your funds toward that one position, then that position is going to have to hold for about 2 or 3 years. I think Georgia did that with defensive line a little bit. I think Georgia did that with linebacker a little bit. I think Georgia did that with other positions across the board. Perhaps, I think, Brandon, that the reclassified tight end Mark Bowman is so exciting a prospect that you might see the Dawgs be right there with the high bidders at the auction house for Mark Bowman, simply because, I said this line on Before the Hedges, and I kind of feel good about it, is there will never be another Brock Bowers. We shouldn't ever expect it to be. But that Mark Bowman kid could be a pretty good stunt double for a pretty good stunt double for Brock Bowers. So you're going to see Georgia be very choosy. Like you go into your favorite grocery store, Brandon, and you're like, okay, we're going to get a really nice cut of steak. We're going to get something really nice from the wine selection or something else like that. I think Georgia is going to choose its big spending positions, and I think they're going to go hard in the paint for those select players.
Now, along these same lines, then we'll shift gears to something else. We also played the clip a little earlier from Greg Sankey saying out loud what I've long believed to be true and predicted would be true. The modest side of me, it pains to admit that I was right about this, that certain collectives are spending more than they're bringing in. They are essentially existing on sort of a churn rate here and, operating at a deficit, trying to get as big as they can, as fast as they can. And that's obviously not sustainable. So if there's any judicious spending on the part of Georgia that avoids that, we believe there probably is. And that's a smart thing because honestly, some of these teams that are making wild promises, not keeping those promises, or spending money they don't yet have and hope to get after the promise is made. Well, clearly that's not a sustainable long-term future. And honestly, that's not the kind of NIL behavior I would want Georgia to be a part of.
Yeah, Brandon, that's a good point. I think obviously I'm not gonna do too much mathing here because I was a journalism major at Georgia, but we had this exercise this week on Before the Hedges where I tried to keep it real with our audience, Brandon. I said these are the top targets. We do them every week, and the top targets are the guys that we feel Georgia wants that also have a strong pull or affection towards Georgia as well. And I looked at those 5 names, and it goes Derek Cooper, it goes Tyler Atkinson, it goes Jared Curtis, it goes Jackson Cantwell, and it goes Mark Bowman. I think realistically, Brennan, it might take $7 or $8 million to sign those 5 players. And we start doing the mathing here a little bit, Brandon, and you're like, okay, is the number 20 million? Is it 20.2? Is it 22.5 or whatever? You can't have it, Brandon, where 5 players are taking up 30% of your revenue share or your collective spend. So that means Georgia's got to find a lot of those diamonds in the rough at certain positions. That means Georgia has got to look in terms of how you allocate. And I do think of Kirby Smart being the Terry College finance major at the University of Georgia in terms of saying, all right, I went deep into the waters. You know, we Georgia got in the money whip game, to use your term, to go through all that. I think that's probably what Georgia needs to best happen. And in some ways, Brandon, there's a risk management quotient to this, because if you have 2 or 3 million, 4 or 5 million invested in your quarterbacks, one gets hurt, well, that changes the way you now have to win football games, especially at those premium positions when that's the guy that you allocated a lot of your roster spend to.
I think that's interesting. I got a few more topics I want to hit. We'll try to do these, I guess, somewhat rapid fire because I want to try to get as much in as we can. There's a topic we haven't addressed in the show this week that's, as I look more at it, perhaps more interesting than I first gave it, I guess, credit for being. Bryson Allen Williams has been hired as an analyst at Georgia, coming from USC. You listen to people out in L.A., they really liked him as a recruiter. Obviously, USC has had a presence in Georgia. You know, Xavier Griffin from Gainesville, for instance, is a linebacker committed to the Trojans right now. How much did Georgia's recruiting efforts improve by bringing Bryson Allen Williams in? Not an on-field coach, he's an analyst, but he comes from USC with some respected recruiting chops. How much does Georgia benefit from this?
I think it's more like relatability, Brandon, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm not going to sit here and put together stacking of things where I think an analyst at USC was really important. When a lot of their wins on the recruiting trail have simply been because USC was able to really entice a lot of kids to commit early with what I view as marketing opportunities that are kind of labeled as a commitment. It's really just advertising that USC is paid for. That having been said, this is a connected guy. This is a very Brandon, I want to think of Juwan Taylor. You remember guys like that? You remember those former Dawgs that have been around? I think in much the same vein that Jarvis Jones continues to be great for Georgia. You have a guy that came up during the Richt era. You have a guy that has clear in-state ties that's really relatable, that wants to get into a future in college coaching. And I think that's just something that helps Georgia, especially a guy that's played at this level, that's kind of came up through this level. When you've got a guy like that, that's, you know, another part of the entourage that hosts these recruits. I mean, Brandon, it happens every year. One of the most impressionable guys on every Georgia recruit I talk to is David Cooper. Coach Coop, the guy that is a lot more than just those slick edits and those slick tweets on social media or on the X platform when Georgia gets a big recruit. He's highly relatable. He's in all those group chats with the kids. He understands them, where their feet are. And the more Georgia can seem relatable to these young men, I think the better they're going to do, especially in terms of like the constant communication that's still necessary. At some points, I think relationships are going to only matter to a certain type of kid. And you've got, luckily, Georgia, the way Kirby's playing this game, Brandon, I want to say this, is they're going to rely heavily on in-state dogs. I think Georgia signed more in-state prospects from the state of Georgia this year than going back to 2013, which is substantial. But those guys are more likely to stay at home. And also, when you see Georgia work this way, you just have the ability to kind of hang on to these guys a little bit better. And it was articulated to me this way. Georgia is going after kids that want to be developed for the NFL, which Georgia can offer. They want the other part of the equation in terms of this team wins, this team is on big stages, and this team wins championships. Brandon, but especially to the in-state kid, there is already a point where kids in their formative years, 12, 13, 14, 15, grew up dreaming of playing for Kirby Smart. I think it was an incredible timestamp we wrote about this week when a four-star safety who runs a 4.48, I believe he's the number 4 safety in the country, said, it was great getting to talk to the legend Kirby Smart. Brandon, I ask you, my friend, does it sound weird to you that we have high school recruits calling Kirby a legend when he's not even 15 years of age yet? What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, that's really something. Obviously, just kind of goes to show you that the Smart era is now kind of getting into a little more of a seasoned age at this point in time. And obviously, Kirby Smart made his bones throughout the years on National Signing Day, including you want to go back to the first 2 classes in 2016, 2017, when National Signing Day only took place in February. We had that version of Signing Day again this week on Wednesday. And, Jeff, it was non-existent for Georgia, but it was essentially only a barely blip of a radar for the rest of the country, too. You had, I guess, Michigan get the big 5-star offensive lineman. Other than that, there really wasn't much of a storyline to be had from National Signing Day. Is this just change that we have to make peace with, or is something lost from college football if we don't really have National Signing Day anymore?
Brendan, I don't know. I think it's basically just another opportunity for branding, I guess, with all the national sites. They're so used to the page turns and clicks that happen in February. Brendan, for all intents and purposes, basically since 2018, 2019, National Signing Day has been whenever the date was in December. It used to be mid-December before the transfer portal came crashing down, and they had to move it up to after the conference championships. You really see, Brandon, that it really is a date that only matters. Brandon, I think 90% of classes, 85% of classes. Here's a good thought. I remember looking at this on the early signing day, Brandon. There are only 2 people that did not sign in the nation's top 100 prospects on early signing day that did not sign. A couple of them waited until 2 days later. We know that headache there with or heartburn there with Justice Terry a little bit, but actually, Brandon, they'll never celebrate it, but it kind of happens in the shadows. I think National Handshake Day or National Agreement Day happens sometime in July or in late June when these key prospects have all taken all their officials. They've weighed everything, and that includes the component of the NIL offer. And that's when they determine what's going to go down. And that's when those things happen in terms of that's when your class really comes together.
All right, last thing for you, and this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but I do think stuff like this matters. And if shows like this don't talk about this, then no one's going to. I don't know if you saw this, but the NCAA has lost in court again. This time it's a Wisconsin defensive back suing to get extra eligibility because he doesn't believe his year in Division II football should count. This is a little bit like Diego Pavia, who sued on the basis of a junior college year. In both cases, the courts have sided with the player against the NCAA. And listen, I get players wanting to remain eligible. I don't fault them for trying to pursue what's in their best interest. But the point here is you cover high school recruits. Every single time we, I guess, do away with the parameters of eligibility, the way they've existed in the past, just 4 years, things like that, then we're reducing the number of spots that are available for high school recruits to play in the future. And, Jeff, this doesn't really impact the Georgia-level recruit because, frankly, any program will find room for them. But I guarantee you this, you go to high schools every week. I certainly talk to plenty of high school coaches. They'll tell you offers are non-existent. Good players that would have gotten offers in the past are not getting offers. And what are we going to do in the future if all of these young men that have really depended on college and college football to be the thing that sort of makes them into men, what are we going to do if that opportunity is not out there as much anymore, where honestly everything in college football right now seems to be operating on short-term thinking? where the current players are leveraging the system to benefit themselves. But I think there's a lot of evidence out there this is hurting the next generation of player, because the more you do away with like 4-year eligibility and stuff like that, you are simply reducing the number of players in the future that'll be able to play college football because there's no spots for them to play. What do you make of that?
Yeah, Brandon, it's really common now. Like, I think for the last 2 years, I've heard recruiters, Brandon, in my network, and let's say they're recruiting somewhere like, I don't know, Jacksonville State or Troy or Appalachian State or East Carolina. And they're like, oh my goodness, we're getting the type of player now that we never would get before. But it's almost like fool's gold because they're going to play a lot. They're going to get a lot of snaps. They're going to shine. And then they're going to get poached by the big boys. It's almost like there's a churn happening from the higher level to the middle tiers. And it includes, I mean, Brandon, we've seen it. There's so many players where they start out as a 5-star. They don't make it at the Ohio State or the Alabama or the Georgia, and then they go find somewhere else, and then maybe they drop down to the food chain to like a North Carolina or maybe somewhere like a Kansas State or maybe like a Texas Tech or Oklahoma State, and then they don't make it there, and then they drop down another level. It's like the same players are getting recruited 3 times, and those high school kids are being left out and being missed, Brandon. I wonder about a guy, let me use a name that DawgNation will love, Chris Smith. Chris Smith waited a while to play at Georgia. Even a guy like Javon Bullard waited a while to play at Georgia. Now, these kids that show up and shine in the end of their second year or really their third year, they're going to be gone, Brandon, because they want to get their reps somewhere else. They want to get their NIL pocket money somewhere else. And it's really a case of, when I talk to high school coaches, Brandon, it's almost like they need it fixed because there are players that are good enough to go play Division I, but these national folks, like even Deion Sanders makes it kind of readily apparent that at his program, he says they're only going after dogs. They're only going after guys like the Tyler Atkinsons. So that means 5 or 6 high school players at the max. And the rest of his roster, the rest of his incoming class, the rebuild or reload of his team are going to be transfer portal guys. And somewhere lost in the mix are there all these players that can't go anywhere to start out with. And maybe they do start out at Division II, or maybe they do start out at somewhere much beneath where maybe their eventual skill set will be. But it comes down to the point. I go to high schools all the time, Brendan, and those coaches are telling me is like, sure, that top 100 guy, that All-American guy is going to get offered. But that guy that's going to be a starter year 2, year 3 at Georgia Tech, he's not getting taken anymore because the rest of that roster is being filled with the portal guys. And Brandon, you have it where even those schools like the Troys, the Coastal Carolinas, the App States, the East Carolinas, the Central Michigans, those guys are thinking we have to win now, otherwise we get fired, or I want to win now so I can move up to get a better job up the college football food chain. It's just really happening in a lot of places, Brandon. And nowhere is this the best interest of kids. College football, character building, those type of things that really make the game so great. When you see a guy like a Dan Jackson hanging out, and you see guys that wait their turn to really star at these schools, because I think it's going to be non-existent.
Jeff, good stuff. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the big game on Sunday. And, of course, we'll see you back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, again very soon as well.
Take it easy, Brandon. Have a good weekend, man.
You too.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So much more we could talk to Jeff Sentell about. You got hot pursuit out there, guys like Jair Edwards and Derek Cooper, and Jeff mentioned Mark Bowman. We're going to get deep into this 2026 class as the time progresses, but boy, there's a lot of other stuff kind of going on out there too. And look, I do realize it's kind of in the weeds. It's not maybe as interesting, as some of the other stuff we talk about. But when you think about one of the best ways to measure the health of college football, how many guys are getting to play it? And under almost any scenario moving forward, it seems like in the future that number is going to start going down. Boy, is that good? I don't think that it is, and it's one of the reasons why, to go back to the Greg Sankey thing from earlier in the show, somebody needs to step in and protect it. And when all of these sort of, newcomers with very little skin in the game, when they come in with all of their radical ideas, in some cases, somebody's just got to say, no, sorry, we're not doing that. We're going to protect an institution that's existed for 150 years, and we're not going to just sort of change it on a dime simply because there may be a few dollars for somebody to make by doing so. We're just going to say no. And at a certain point in time, someone's got to realize that is an option. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And before I shout out Royal Caribbean, let me remind you that today is the last day to register for your chance to win our trip to the DawgNation cruise in April on board Utopia of the Seas. Obviously, our friends at Kroger have made that possible for you. So while you still have time, go to DawgNation.com/contests and register for your chance to win. All you got to do is simply tell us your top moment, favorite moment from the 2024 season. Obviously, there's so many to choose from. Write in, let us know that, and you could be selected at random. And if you do, you and a guest on your way to the DawgNation cruise. It's a hotel in Port Canaveral the night before the cruise on April 20th. That's a state room for two on board Utopia of the Seas, April 21st to the 25th. That's a little gas card to get you down to Port Canaveral, help you with that. You're talking about some onboard credit to enjoy while you're on Utopia of the Seas. Great opportunity for you. DawgNation.com/contests. Register for your chance to win. Today is the last day to do so. And speaking of Utopia of the Seas, I got to tell you, man, I cannot wait to show this off to a lot of our DawgNation cruisers who have never been on it before. This is the game-changing ship. We love it because it's the newest ship, at least for now, in the Royal Caribbean fleet. And it's a huge step forward for Royal Caribbean in saying, we're going to put our sort of newest and arguably among our best ships, we're going to put them towards those like shorter cruises, the 4-night cruises, in this case coming out of Port Canaveral. You got so many awesome ways to enjoy Utopia of the Seas. So let Jessica Slater tell you more about it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Email jslater@dreamvacations.com, and she can tell you all about that. Can't wait to see you on board Utopia of the Seas in April. Hope, though, at some point in time, if you're not coming on our DawgNation cruise, you'll experience the best that Royal Caribbean has to offer. All right, we got a lot to do. I'm going to try to do it with some quickness here. Let me start with Shane Beamer. We told you the other day that one of the bigger stories of the offseason thus far is really a headline you didn't read. You didn't hear anything about Lenore Sellers leaving South Carolina or top defensive end pass rusher Dylan Stewart. That South Carolina's ability to hold on to its top players is among the bigger stories of the SEC offseason thus far. And frankly, it's kind of a shame that it's surprising and interesting that, somebody didn't successfully poach players of this caliber from a program that you probably don't think of as like among the biggest spenders necessarily. Shane Beamer is speaking out, not necessarily on that topic, but related to it, on the notion that we've got two portal windows, the one in December and the one post-spring practice. I believe the one post-spring practice is a huge problem for plenty of coaches. Beamer quoted this week saying, people don't need two different transfer portal windows that cover 6 weeks to decide whether they want to transfer them somewhere. You either want to be a part of the program or you don't. And I think that's probably true. That, this notion that you've got almost 2 full months of, hey, do you want to do this or not? Just creates problem for instability. I think some of the instability in college athletics is on purpose. I've said that before. Chaos imposed. And I think coaches fighting back against that is probably pretty appropriate. What we need is somebody to listen. And what we need is somebody to realize this isn't just self-serving because Beamer doesn't want to lose his players. It is serving a sport that we'd like to see be recognizable 5, 10, 20 years from now. I think that's probably valuable. Speaking of coaches, Georgia Tech has made a defensive coordinator hire, pulling Blake Gideon off of the Texas staff. Seems like a pretty good hire. Don't know that it's a game changer. Gideon, was he a defensive backs guy at Texas, I guess, now coming to Georgia Tech. This is a Tech team that's going to have some expectations for this year. They had a top 25 recruiting class this season. They've gotten some mention in some of the way too early top 25 stuff that we're seeing. They obviously, lost guys like Singleton, the wide receiver, but they also hold on to some stuff too. I think that Tech will be kind of an interesting team in the ACC, and obviously of note for Georgia because, as we've said before, that's kind of the big non-conference game for UGA this year. Sometimes it's a team like Clemson at the beginning of a season. In a year like this, it's going to be Tech at the end of the year. So, the game was close this past season. So because of that, Georgia probably forced to take them at least a little bit seriously for right now. Notre Dame has lost another coach. Al Golden has already left to go be Cincinnati Bengals defensive coordinator. Now DeLan McCullough, the running backs coach, he's on his way to work with Chip Kelee and the newly formed kind of new look Las Vegas Raiders organization. I think this is interesting because both the teams that coached and played for the national championship have now had a lot of coaching departures. Ohio State's lost both coordinators. Notre Dame losing key assistants too. The one thing we know is that success not easy to replicate year over year. And whether it be player departures, coaching departures, for both Notre Dame and Ohio State, they're going to be facing that challenge of. And by the way, they're both going to be among the higher rated teams to begin the 2025 season. But given all the changeover, maintaining that position, not easy to do. And the fact that Georgia won 2 national championships, followed that up a year later with kind of just a one-loss season by only 3 points, and obviously won the SEC this year. Even though it's not the end-of-season results that Georgia fans want, that consistency, as we watch Notre Dame and Ohio State in 2025, we may be reminded of just how impressive the Georgia consistency has been. Perhaps that's a possibility. Anyway, I'll also finish with this as we're cruising around the SEC. Florida has made another coaching hire, bringing in Robert Bala to be the co-defensive coordinator here. Now, let me tell you why I think this is interesting. And once again, we probably haven't talked enough about some of this kind of stuff. Do you remember, a couple of years ago with the Billy Napier era, Austin Armstrong comes in as defensive coordinator. And, Armstrong, kind of a sort of a goofy guy, but had a lot of energy and was really treated by Florida fans as sort of the next Kirby Smart. You remember that? They said that a lot. Well, now Armstrong's time at Florida was really unsuccessful, and he's now moving on to Houston to be their defensive coordinator. And so what you got in place here at Florida, if I've got this right, you've got like 3 co-defensive coordinators, at least when it comes to title here. Bala's going to have that. But in addition to that, you got other guys. They're going to kind of have the same kind of role here. You got Sinceri that's got that. There's another guy. You got like 3 different guys that have some form of like co-defensive coordinator title. It's a really interesting power structure there in a year in which Florida needs success. Now, this is not the only kind of assistant coaching drama they have. A lot of Florida fans wanted someone other than Billy Napier calling the plays offensively for 2025. Does not seem like that's going to be the case. So they're not really kind of happy about that. They wanted sort of a fresh influence on offense too. So as we kind of get a little deeper into the 2025 season, I don't dispute, because of the presence of DJ Lagway, that Florida could be one of the teams destined for some improvement this year. I don't think that people who've touted that are necessarily wrong in saying that. But I do think figuring out like your power structure about who your most influential assistant coaches are going to be, I do feel like there's something that needs to be done there with that. And I would say that situation, admittedly, we're Gatorators. We like, kind of chiding Florida. But in this particular case, I don't think we're incorrect to point out that it's a little bit of a messy situation right now in terms of, power structure with Florida assistant coaches, who's doing what, and who can help Billy Napier get the kinds of wins against a very tough schedule, once again, that he needs to preserve his job. Could be interesting to watch unfold down in Gainesville. We will make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on DawgNation Daily, time now for what we call our long drink, long finish. It's our great way to close out the show each and every Friday. And obviously this Friday, looking ahead to the big game on Sunday between the Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, and the great pride that Georgia fans feel about so many former Dogs, whether it be Malik Herring on the Chiefs side and obviously a whole host of former UGA defenders with the Philadelphia Eagles. This heavy UGA presence is really, really cool. And we've tried to celebrate that this week. Our Cody Chaffins was in New Orleans for the event known as Super Bowl opening night, and using some pretty clever props, got some great reflection from former Georgia players on what Georgia meant to them, still means to them, as they get ready to play, in many cases, the biggest game of their life on Sunday. Great stuff from Cody. Let's watch and listen to this as a part of our long drink, long finish right now.
Hold out your hand, close your eyes. Just kind of an instant reaction to what it means to you.
Okay.
I can open?
Yeah, take a look.
Confetti from the national championship game. Probably one of the most blissful moments of my life, honestly. You know, it took a whole lot of work, sweat, and tears. The guys, we battled with. So this means everything.
Man, throwback. When them boys won that thing twice, man, just bring back good memories. Special place in my heart, and it's close to home.
Show it to us. Tell us what it means to you.
Man, this is such an iconic moment. We actually had a time and team meeting where Coach Sirianni had us close our eyes and talk about one of our greatest feelings when we played football. And I couldn't help but to think about this moment. So much emotions, man. So much love for just the city of Athens. With it being 41 years and not happening, man. Words couldn't explain of how proud I was of my team and Coach Mark, just the whole organization, just be able to support them, wear the G on my chest.
Tell me about this guy. Tell me what he means to you.
Look, man, he's I wouldn't be here without him, man. I wouldn't be here without him, and he's done a lot for us. Still doing a lot for us, and we just grateful for him.
Hey, this guy right here, he's special, man. Listen, he'll care about you and he'll hug you and then he'll treat you like no other, man. I love this guy, and he come across to some people, as a yeller, but no, he's just a loud carer. I call him a loud carer. A lot of bleeps around. So yeah. Kirby Smart, one of the greatest coaches I've ever been around, man. He demands excellence and he demands a standard no matter what it is, man. And just having a guy like that, you can never lack in any situation or any adversity that you go through, man. Just trust your preparation and just knowing that your standard's demanded in anything that you do, whether that's school, as a man, and out there on the field as well, man. So just having a person like that and just a model and icon around you like that could definitely help you be successful.
What's your message right in the camera to Dog Nation?
I miss y'all, and I love y'all, and we appreciate the support, and we got to do it this time.
My message to Dog Nation is rally behind Kirby Smart, support him, be there for him, because he's going to pull through for all of us. Go Dogs.
I tell you, man, I just love that so much. Love those guys, rooting for them hard on Sunday. Very well done by Cody Chaffins. In fact, let's bring Cody on here right now. Cody, how much fun was that package to kind of work on, be back in New Orleans, get a chance to, kind of basically get a chance to speak to those guys? I think it came across well on video, really, really entertaining on video. What was it like to kind of be there with them and put all that together?
So you've got all those guys who, for Georgia people, they just mean so much to you. Yeah. And part of that is what they did on the field. But the other part is like Nolan Smith and Jordan Davis, like they mean so much like outside of Georgia. Just the way when they were there, how much it always meant to them to be playing for Georgia. No, I can remember Nolan Smith when he was at UGA saying, I want to be able to bring my kids back and tell them about, what I helped build here. So the fact that, kind of like you talked about earlier too, even Kelee, a guy from Arizona, the program means so much to him. So it was cool to catch up with those guys. It was really interesting, like Nolan Smith right off the top, because it was a zoo at Super Bowl opening night. Like, we're in the Superdome. They have the field roped off, so it's everywhere around the field. It's shoulder to shoulder. There's people speaking multiple languages, because you have broadcasters from all over the world. You got people there's a dude dressed up as a genie, guys dressed up like Andy Reid. Everybody wants to kind of do their thing. And so Nolan Smith actually was trying to run away at first. He was like, I don't want any part of this. This is his first Super Bowl. Jordan Davis, he and Kobe were there for the last Super Bowl, but this is his first one. So he really didn't want any part of it. He was trying to get away. And so when I first started asking him questions, he was real short about it and just wanted to tell, we're just focused on the game. All of those cliches you hear from players, it's the next game, it's the biggest, da-da-da. Well, then I brought out that bag of stuff, and you saw how much he lit up when I brought the Kirby Smart face out, or we brought, the newspaper out they had from when they won the national championship. It totally changed things for him. And you could see, again, still how much the program means to him. So that made it much easier, much more fun. It's one of those nights, and I've done a few of them now in my career, that Super Bowl opening night where you can be a little fun, be a little wacky, and these guys are getting ready to play one of the biggest games of their lives, but you could have a little fun with it. So we tried to do that, and just watching them kind of light up made it so much fun.
Yeah, the props were a great idea, I thought. And the one thing that kind of comes through the video for me, and we've been showing them all week long, is how genuine it all feels. Honestly, they could fake it, and if they did fake it, I'd probably be happy with that, because it just sort of it's kind of a feel-good, thing to hear. But I really find all of them, reflecting back their time at Georgia, Jordan Davis, obviously we were huge fans of his when he played, and Nolan and Lewis and the rest of these guys, Kelee, I find them to be really believable when they reflect back on that. And for those of us who had our own, it sounds, exaggerated to say this, but our own lives were changed because of the success that those guys had, the fact that it also made such a big impact on them, it wasn't just one of the things that's happened for them, but kind of a foundational shaping experience for them. Honestly, I like the fact they still have such positive memories of all of that on the doorstep of another big football moment now during their professional careers.
And I think there was a little part of it that was like in this sea of other interviewer people, right? It was a little piece of home for them, somewhere they could feel comfortable. Is finding somebody, we want to talk about Georgia Bulldogs. Okay, it's not some random person who knows nothing about football trying to ask me the dumbest question about Patrick Mahomes for the 100th and 50th time. No, it was a little piece of home and something they're always proud to talk about. But yeah, I think as Georgia fans, you sometimes run into this where you're like, I just want it to mean as much to those guys as it does to me.
That's
and of course it always does. But I can just remember, as even being a student, like Georgia would lose like a crushing game, and then you'd see everybody out downtown, and it would just kind of be like, I'm crushed right now. Like, are you guys crushed? And you could tell for those guys, especially those guys in particular, it means so much to them. It was really funny to talk to Lewis Seen because he's one of those I did not talk to a lot when he was in Athens, partially because we could never see his face. I had a couple people write on Twitter, that's what Lewis Seen looks like because he had the dreads in front of his eyes for all 4 years he was in Athens. But he was so well-spoken. And the clip you heard at the end of him talking was something we hadn't really shared much of this week, and why he said his message to Dog Nation is to rally around Kirby Smart, because I said, hey man, people are writing off the SEC forever now because they didn't win 2 national championships in a row, and Georgia lost 3 games and people are freaking out. He said spoiled rotten. Dog fans are spoiled rotten. And it is kind of true, right? Like, we're not winning a national championship, all of a sudden everything's a mess. Georgia can't recruit anymore, like you said on the show today. We had the number 2 class, and we now have the top recruit at 4 different positions.
Let me just say this real quick before we let you go. For the people that don't have experience with this, I've done Super Bowl opening night before. You've done a lot more than I have, but I've done at least one, and it's such a madhouse. Like the year I was there, this is back when like Barstool Dave Portnoy was like feuding with Roger Goodell. And so he's there in costume because he wasn't supposed to be there. And like that's pretty par for the course in terms of a lot of celebrities, a lot of comedians, a lot of people trying to get kind of a funny viral moment. And, so you using props is sort of in keeping with what other people are kind of doing because there's so much sort of, kind of exaggerated, I guess, content creation going on. For the people who have not experienced this before, what is the actual Super Bowl opening night scene really like?
It is everything you would hope it would be. So I did it Houston when the Falcons were playing in the Super Bowl. So that night I met Kel from Good Burger. He was dressed up like he was going to be selling. I met Simone Biles that night. Chad Ochocinco was there. We had Cooper Manning, of course, marching around in a marching band uniform. So you always get the weird stuff going on. And that's kind of what that night is about. And that's part of the reason, like, they said, hey, Cody, you can go. Now, you could potentially talk to all these Georgia guys throughout the week. It's a way different setup, though. It's more like what we had in New Orleans, where they're just all sitting at tables and you could go around and talk to them. And it just feels more very focused on football. This is the kind of the wild night. And you got, like I said, there was a guy dressed up in all blue in a genie outfit. So you just had the weirdness out there, and you do head turns to, I recognize that face off of TV, because everybody's there, everybody wants to have their moment. I'm elbowing Guillermo from the Jimmy Kimmel Show out of the way to try and get my question in to Jordan Davis, and I just didn't stop talking. I made eye contact and just kept asking questions because I didn't want him to get distracted by Guillermo, who had, I think, a pickle jar that he was trying to get somebody to open. But everybody's got shtick, so we hadn't had to match that with my shtick.
I tell you this, Cody, great job, great work, a lot of fun making a Super Bowl that involves a lot of former Georgia players feel a lot closer to home. Really appreciate that, and thanks for stopping by our Long Drink, Long Finish here today,
Happy to do it.
And by the way, speaking of the Long Drink, Long Finish, our friends at the Finnish Long Drink, you're getting ready for the big game on Sunday. Beverage is obviously a very big part of that. We understand that. And you can enjoy everything when it comes to all the various long drink varieties, whether it be the long drink zero sugar, that's no carbs, no sugar. I probably need to be drinking more of that, to be completely honest with you. The traditional citrus, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. How about the peach flavored version? The weather's been great. I've been out the golf course a couple times this week. Many of you have been too. When I'm thinking about golf, I'm thinking about the Finnish long drink. When I'm thinking about the big game on Sunday, perhaps sitting out on the back patio, maybe build a fire, watch that. Long drink once again goes great. So you want to enjoy some football this weekend, the final time of the year. You better do it up right. The Finnish long drink, big part of all of that. So make sure you find out more online at thelongdrink.com. Great to have the Finnish long drink as a part of our long drink, long finish. And quite a marathon show here today. It's like first Friday in February. We're doing, 16-hour show here. But nonetheless, before we wrap up, let me also send some well wishes out to Georgia basketball. You need one on Saturday. Mississippi State comes in, top 25 team. Georgia's tournament hopes still well within the grasp, but you got to keep winning. Finding those wins at home important. So good luck to the Dawgs against the other Bulldogs, Mississippi State on Saturday. How about a golden shoe here today, too? Our buddy Texas Dog writes in, using this very interesting can of Jittery Joe's coffee. Our friends at Jittery Joe's, we love them. This is a can of coffee. Now, we cover that up because we're family friendly, but we don't, mind our friends at Jittery Joe's having some fun with that too. Texas Dog says, I think the 2025 Dogs need to open up a can like this every single week on a weekly basis. Hashtag Golden Shoe. So the Jittery Joe's having some fun there with a pretty clever coffee can. Texas Dog sharing that with us. We'll give Golden Shoes all the way around, and we can certainly hope the Dogs open up a can a lot against competition here this season, including those lousy, stinking Gators. It's been 1,553 days since Florida has beaten Georgia. We love that number to keep on going. We hope you all have a great weekend. We will see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's they just take great care of you. We certainly appreciate that. Tyron Brown in the YouTube comment section asked about who my favorite recruit is for the class of 2025, the most anxious to see this upcoming season. So, Tyron, I will say that I briefly mentioned this to Jeff, too, and I think our mic may still be on back there. I think I'm getting a little bit of mic noise there. But I will tell you that the recruits that I'm interested in are the ones that I think have a chance to make the most immediate impact. And for me right now, that's a couple of wide receivers. Now, I know that Georgia's really crowded the receiver position, and I mean that in a good way. Transfers you bring in, things of that nature. But, boy, when I look at a Talon Taylor, when I look at a C.J. Wiley, I'm really seeing guys that I think could play for Georgia this season and perhaps play a significant role for Georgia this season. And so in my mind, I kind of gravitate towards those names. The other, and I don't really know what the season this year has in store. I don't know. When you think about a guy like Isaiah Gibson, need at defensive end, need at edge rushing outside linebacker. Gibson sort of that tweener who could maybe play the one, maybe play the other. You kind of wonder what this year could hold for him too. You kind of wonder if that's the case. You do wonder. Good to see Porter in here making fun of those lousy, stinking Gators. I love that. Appreciate Jack Fullerton encouraging folks to give us that like. Appreciate that there, too. Monty Easton on the subject of Jared Curtis. Yeah, that's a recruiting battle we'll be watching closely. No doubt about that. Georgia on Tap pointing out that Jordan Davis looking pretty fit right now. Yeah, I mean, Davis is a giant dude, but he carries his weight well. He really does. He's looking pretty good. Brodo Baggins wondering about the over-under 6.5, hitting a line that he's setting on how many times they'll show Taylor Swift and how many times they'll say Mahomes. Well, they'll no doubt say Mahomes plenty. You kind of wonder. I mean, it seems like the broadcasts this year are not going crazy with the Taylor Swift stuff, right? I mean, obviously her presence, the game's going to be a huge deal. But it seems like that's not the kind of thing they've tried to overdo too much. Producers on these games, somewhat, I think, aware of that criticism. If I had to guess, Bill Shirley giving you a go dog, sick 'em, woof, woof, woof. You love that. Chris Alzer says that Talon Taylor is going to be the biggest impactful freshman. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a receiver for Georgia that has a chance to play, and I think you could be very glad to have him. Kent Holcomb showing some appreciation for Cody Chaffins for some great interviews. I thought they were very good. Garrison Tucker says, do you think the 2025 class will have an impact like 2017? Probably not, if I had to guess, simply because, back then, Georgia needed freshmen to step in and play right away. Georgia's quarterback is a starting freshman. Georgia's right tackle was a starting right tackle was a freshman. You had major freshman impact players that year because Georgia had a lot of immediate playing time to offer. Georgia doesn't really have that anymore. But that doesn't mean that some of these freshmen couldn't make the immediate impact. But it's just not, you don't have the opening for starters the way you once did. Let's see what else. UJ Marine says they have 5,000 Super Bowl credentials. I think it's probably for the media day. There's no way they have 5,000 for the game, but they probably do allow 5,000 for like the opening night, the media day. They probably do that. Randy Hall says that I get a free solarium suite from Royal Caribbean. I do not, but I will tell you this, though. This is fun for me. Every now and then I get invited to go on these inaugural, not quite the inaugural sailing. It's like a little bit of a preview sailing when the new ship comes in. They want to kind of show it off to some folks, and Royal Caribbean in the past has been kind enough to invite me to be a part of some of these. And one of the things you get to do when you go on one of these kind of preview sailings is you get to go tour some of these suites. And I am amazed by it. I mean, it's amazing. They have, like you say, the solarium suite. They also have like a family suite, which it's like something out of a movie. You walk the steps in the suite, and they kind of play music like a piano every step you take. All of the tables in the suite all have like games built into them, like video style games. You have a slide that goes from the top level down to the bottom level. Even the fact that you have these multi-level suites on these ships is amazing. I have never stayed in one. My guess is I probably never will. But some of the suites they do have on board are wild. They're wild. And frankly, I just like the fact to be able to see them. And they will kind of let you go tour some of those and kind of see how the other half lives a little bit. And I'm always thankful to be able to do that, even if I'll never quite be able to stay in one. Garrison Tucker pointing out we're getting very close to Brave spring training. I am excited about that. Don't quite know what we get from these Braves here this year, but still excited about the season. Still very much excited about the season. Let me go to Facebook for a moment. Let's see how things are going over there. Getting ready to roll into a weekend here. Ken Holcomb says, not really a fan of Taylor Swift. So my daughter loves Taylor Swift. And so I kind of have appreciation because that's just what my daughter likes. But I'm just not that into pop music just in general. Just, pop music is sort of a thing that I don't really participate in. When I was, I guess, a little younger, I probably did. But I just don't have a lot of interest in pop music. We watched a little bit of that Eras Tour thing that's on Disney Plus, and it's a good show. I mean, I don't dispute that. But it's just not my thing. I just don't really care about pop music. I don't even know. Is it Kendrick Lamar doing the Super Bowl halftime show? This is not a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just telling you the truth. I don't know the first thing about Kendrick Lamar. Could not tell you one song. I guess he feuded with what's his face. I do know that. Was it he feuded with Drake, right? Now I do know that. But what the nature of the feud was about, who won the feud, I guess Kendrick Lamar won because he's doing the Super Bowl halftime show. But I don't know anything beyond it. Was like a huge thing on the internet for a little while. I don't know one song. Could not pick him out of a lineup. Could not tell you. Could not tell you. Johnny Prescott going back to what Nolan Smith said when Kelee Ringo got the pick six and how Nolan Smith was like, Kirby wanted him to go down. We were like, nah, don't do that. That's funny. As I mentioned the Pacific Northwest earlier, our buddy Kirk Schultz checking in to say there's a lot of love for Georgia in the PNW. He says, I wear my dog merchandise everywhere and always hear Go Dogs, even from Duck fans and Beaver fans. Duck fans love Coach Lanning here, and had many Duck fans say Lanning, brought that sort of Georgia winning spirit there, winning culture to Oregon. It is funny, when Oregon came here in 2022, it would have been Lanning's first game, ironically against his former employer. There was this guy walking around. He had a Dan Lanning shirt that I thought was really cool, and I wanted to go take a picture of it. And just because I like to sometimes do stuff like that, kind of put it on social media or whatever else. And the guy at first thought I was like making fun of him and like going to try to embarrass him or something like that. It's like, no, you got to understand. Georgia fans love Dan Lanning, and y'all are the opponent today. But A, we don't think you have any chance of, competing, and B, huge love for Lanning. So it is kind of interesting that I do think there's a little bit of Georgia and Oregon on the field haven't really crossed paths other than that game in 2022, which was not competitive. So for now, I do think there's a little bit of a shared love between Georgia and Oregon because of the Dan Lanning presence. I think you're probably right about that, Kirk. Let's see what else. Kevin Chapman saying, well, the Falcons drafted Dawg this year. Boy, I'd certainly love it. I saw a mock the other day that had Mikael Williams going to Atlanta, but who knows if they really will ever do that. Michael Anthony Rose says we need another Nick Chubb in the backfield. Sonny Michel wasn't hurt either. Yeah, it's kind of funny. So, like back then, Georgia was putting up massive rushing numbers. Now, Chubb and Michel are arguably the best tandem of running backs ever on one team at the same time. So that stands to reason they would put up big numbers. And DeAndre Swift was the third-string running back that year, which was obviously an embarrassment of riches. But the following year, people forget this. This is year 2 for DeAndre Swift. This is Elijah Holyfield as the other back in that tandem. They still, the pair of Holyfield and Swift still ran for like 2,500 yards. What's funny, though, is that obviously, then Georgia wasn't as accomplished from a passing standpoint. I do believe as a coach, Kirby Smart was a lot more conservative. I think he's a little less so now. You had this situation where Georgia was great running it, but probably not as good as they needed to be throwing it. Well, in the transition under Todd Monken, all of a sudden now Georgia is throwing it much better than they used to. But it's weird that the rushing numbers kind of just were greatly reduced in the era in which Georgia became much better throwing it. And on the one hand, that seems like, obviously that'd be true. There's going to be a trade-off for everything, and I don't dispute that. But if you look at how good certain passing teams have been when it comes to the running game, like, for instance, go look at, Clyde Edwards-Hilaire running in a LSU offense in 2019, or what's his face for Alabama in 2020, the running back from California. Golly, these names these days, I cannot hold on to these names. The running back from California for Alabama in 2020, or Travis Etienne for Clemson in the Trevor Lawrence era. Some of these really prolific passing teams saw the passing numbers really elevate the rushing attack. And for Georgia, for whatever reason, even though the offense itself was stellar, the improvement in Georgia's passing attack did seem to diminish the rushing stats. This year, Georgia's running game was unfortunately anemic, but the downward trend for Georgia when it comes to ground game had been happening for a number of years. And it didn't really matter because the offense itself was better than it had ever been. But if you isolate just the rushing numbers, they've been kind of going in the wrong direction kind of since kind of the early days of Kirby Smart. You'd like to see that fixed without sacrificing any passing game while you do it. William Camacho says if the Chiefs win the Super Bowl, he's going to boycott the NFL. Here's what I'll tell you. I've said this before. I've kind of compared this to like the house edge in blackjack. If you play perfect basic strategy in blackjack, the house edge against you is only 0.5%. That's still enough to make a big difference for the casino, though. I think the NFL stuff works the same way. There's obviously an incentive to have the Chiefs in the big game. I don't think it's completely rigged in favor of them because, frankly, I think that's just too complicated to do. But are there subtle ways to give a slight house edge to the Chiefs? Of course there is. Now, the problem with that is that slight house edge, 0.5%, for instance, is not enough to go to the bank with. In other words, the one response people always have to the NFL being rigged is, well, all you got to do is bet the rigged side, which is a pretty strong retort to people on that if you're so sure it's fixed, then just simply bet on the fixed side. That's where the problem lies, is that while, hey, if it's a close call, magically a lot of those seem to go the direction of the Chiefs, it's still not automatic enough that you could actually take it to the bank and bet on it and be profitable. And I would say that if you do believe that there is just baked into the cake of the NFL this belief that it's good for Kansas City to keep winning because of Tay and everything else, keep in mind that there is no huge benefit to them winning the Super Bowl. There's a massive benefit to them playing in the Super Bowl, but there's no huge benefit into them winning the Super Bowl. So if there is a slight thumb on the scale that's gotten them there, whether they win or lose, the ratings are going to kind of be the same at this point in time. So just keep that in mind. Just keep that in mind. In other words, I am not unwilling to listen to conspiratorial beliefs around, officiating the Chiefs. I'm not unwilling to listen to it, but I do believe it's a little more difficult to both quantify and define than perhaps sometimes is given credit for. Bill Shirley points out that sometimes it's the no calls that get you, and we certainly believe that. That's been college football's issue. Magically the teams that Georgia plays, and Georgia's not the only major school for whom this is true. Ohio State kind of dealt with that this year too, in total transparency. Magically, when some of these teams play the biggest teams, the highest ranked teams, magically they don't get any penalties. They don't get any penalties. Georgia's been 120th in the country in penalty yards assessed against opponents for like 3 years in a row. It's crazy. Najee Harris, by the way, was the running back's name I was trying to mention. I'm telling you, y'all, my plan is to do this job until I'm 80, whatever technology looks like then. I'm not going to know anybody's name by the time I get to be 80. I don't even know what I'll be saying because I'm forgetting Najee Harris's name in the middle of a conversation right now. Like, that's scary. Like, what is it going to be like? Motivated Dedicated said he's got Philadelphia by 17. I will tell you this. Like, you start thinking about, like, interesting ways to play this. I realize not everybody cares about gambling. I think that's fine. But I sort of see this game more, like, if it really is kind of close and down to the wire, then if you're a Philly backer, you do get pretty nervous about what Mahomes might do. Because even if there's a slight officiating edge, you still got to be the kind of team that can take advantage of that week to week to week to week. And obviously, Kansas City's won 8 gazillion sort of one-score games in a row. It's unfathomable and almost impossible to replicate the success they've had in these close games. Some of that is because Mahomes really does elevate his level of play in these big moments. It just seems like he does. So if it's a close game, boy, you have to – it becomes very easy to want to back Mahomes in that situation. It really does. However, to go back to Motivated and Dedicated here, you can also look at an alternate line, Eagles winning double digits, Eagles winning by 2 touchdowns. If you want to take Eagles by more than 17, I promise you, you can get a pretty price on that, a very, very pretty price. So if you can kind of arbitrage this the right way, Chiefs to cover the 1.5, coupled with a small dusting on Philadelphia to win by more than 2 touchdowns. That could be kind of fun. Could be kind of fun. Because the point is, theoretically, you could lose both bets. You obviously could lose both bets, but just sort of looking at kind of a creative way to attack that. All right, let's see what else. All right, we got to go. It's Friday. Motivated Dedicated said that that he thinks that Mahomes is going to get stuck on the sideline while Philly runs up and down the field. Now, I said earlier in the show, at plus 1,000, plus 1,700, I think it could be worth a small flyer. Obviously, this is a remote chance, so you don't want to bet big on it. Small flyer on either Nolan or Jalen winning Super Bowl MVP. If you wanted to hedge that, my hedge on that would be Saquon Barkley, good odds on you. Some books will give you record-setting odds. Good odds on Barkley breaking Timmy Smith's record for most rushing yards in a Super Bowl, or at the very least, odds on surpassing 200 yards rushing. If you really believe that Philadelphia is going to win this game, and if you do really believe that they're going to win comfortably, then the way to attack that is some sort of massive prop around a rushing total for Saquon Barkley. Kayla Meyer says his wife is due tomorrow. Appreciate prayers for safe delivery of a healthy baby girl, our first. Caleb, that is such awesome news. You will be in our prayers. Boy, I really can't wait to hear back from you about all of that. Hope it goes well. I had two very different experiences with my kids. My daughter being born, it's almost like an outpatient procedure. We were just sort of in and out. It was by the book, very, very simple and straightforward. My son, a little bit more involved process, which perhaps sort of speaks to what their lives have been like thus far. A little more involved process. We were there for a few days on that one. So they're all different. But, boy, what a great blessing it is. And, Caleb, cannot wait to hear you come back and tell us good news about that. So you will indeed be in our prayers. And we always appreciate your participation in our show. Foster Moss says that he's got some action with Prize Picks and Underdog fantasy right now that's going to make or break his marriage. Well, listen, we like a little bit of action here and there. That's certainly a lot of fun. But we would certainly suggest not putting anything out there that's beyond what you would typically spend on entertainment. So good luck to you, Foster. You know we love you. But y'all be careful putting down large sums here. This is, as the old line says, for entertainment purposes only. Oh, yeah, by the way, be careful about this. Mahomes typically runs more in the playoffs than he does during the regular season, AFC Championship game. He had a good number of rushing attempts. But here's the other thing that gets tricky on Mahomes. If you want to bet over rushing yards on him, not attempts, but yards, keep in mind, there was it the last Super Bowl or like the one before that, where you want to talk about one of the hottest topics in betting, which kind of gives you an idea of sort of the dark corners of the internet I spend my life in. But people were losing their mind because on the kneel downs, and these count, every play counts now. On the kneel downs, Mahomes went 7 yards back, took a knee. Next play went 8 yards back and took a knee. So you're subtracting 15 yards off his rushing yard total on 2 kneel down plays. So it all counts. It all counts. So be real careful about that. Be real careful about that. William Camacho checking out. We appreciate you being here, William. Michael Anthony Rose says, why is the sports media so down on UGA? Do you think it's the present quarterback situation? The truth is the media outside of UGA, I don't think they're really down on Georgia, I don't think. And in fact, we see this sometimes where the national media that doesn't have any kind of an emotional tie to Georgia, it seems like in recent years, sometimes they're more favorable in their view of Georgia than some fans are. I don't know that I've seen a media person who does the way too early top 25s or anything like that. I haven't really seen Georgia lower than say 4th or 5th. Now, obviously, Georgia wants to win a national championship. 4th or 5th is still, one of the teams with the best chance of winning it. I've seen plenty of Georgia fans who don't think that Georgia will be that good next year. So I would say that right now, and you can check me on this, that the overall opinion of national media is a little higher than perhaps some of your Georgia fan friends are, who are blowing up social media feeds about, Georgia being doomed because of so-and-so coach or, whatever else. I think the national media is maybe a little higher on Georgia than some Georgia fans are. But perhaps I'm wrong on that. Marshall Fleming wants to see Jalen Carter pick up Patrick Mahomes and slam him down. We know we know he's capable of doing that. We've seen him do it before. UG Marine says, where do I have to go? It's Friday. Well, I'd say here and do this all day long. We also have people who get us on the air here. We want to be respectful of them. Also, we have reason to believe the algorithm doesn't love it when we go 16 hours for the show. They don't love that. That doesn't stop us from doing very long shows, but the algo probably does not support that. Let's see what else. I'm going to finish with this. This is a very strong opinion. He says, none of the quarterbacks with multiple Super Bowl rings ever won one when they were the only advantage their team had. Therefore, if Kansas City wins, that makes Mahomes the GOAT. It's a great provocative opinion. Do I agree with it? I don't know, because that's what makes it a provocative opinion. It gives you some room for debating. For instance, we said this after the AFC Championship. What Steve Spagnuolo does as Chiefs defensive coordinator is almost as valuable as anything else they get. So now that individual names defensively aren't as strong, but Spags gives them a real edge defensively. Very creative with his blitzes, things like that. In fact, if you want to look at some of these props for obscure names getting sacks, defensive backs getting sacks, cornerbacks getting sacks at like 50-1 or better odds, as much as he's creative with his pass pressure at the exact right time, there's some fun to be had with that, I believe. I think Spags is a really good defensive coordinator. Now, your point about the offensive talent, though, this is a team with, apologies to Worthy, Kelsey near the end of his career, Kareem Hunt getting a lot of the carries. There's not a lot of, great offensive weaponry the way that, Joe Montana would have had, guys like that. It's an interesting opinion. I do think the basic crux of it, which is that with another win, Patrick Mahomes' ascendancy is undeniable. Undeniable. I think you could be on to something with that. It's a fun topic. All right, let's go for now. Y'all check out RS Andrews online. Don't let your Super Weekend get ruined or your chance to watch Georgia basketball tomorrow get ruined because your water heater goes out. People don't want to take cold showers, and oh my gosh, the complaining you'll hear. We'll go ahead and sort of head that off at the bin by getting that water heater replaced. In many cases, if you've got an issue with that, RS Andrews can replace it the same day. That's why the RS and RS Andrews stands for rapid service. So find them online at rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That's what they're all about. One more time, it's online at rsandrews.com. Okay, enjoy the weekend. Football for the last time. Basketball, a big need for a big win. And we'll be back Monday. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.